Introducing the stepping razor. Introducing the cool and deadly.
And this is an introduction.
With her powerful performances, she questions gender, race, and the aftermath of colonial oppression. Nora Chipaumire has forged an artistic path from Zimbabwe to New York through choreography and dance, picking up multiple awards along the way. Her piece, Nehanda, Manifesting Thinking, is now on the stage here in Paris. She joins us in the studio to tell us more. Nora, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
Now, this piece is the third and final chapter of a contemporary opera that shines a light on an extraordinary story with a truly impressive woman at its centre. She was a 19th century spirit medium, a leader from the Shona people who rose up against the British in colonial Rhodesia, which is now Zimbabwe.
Yes.
Tell us a bit about this woman and how she inspired your work.
Oh, yeah, Charwe Nyakasikana. And may I just say, for all women who have been instrumental in changes, social and political changes, she definitely just drove people to shift the way they were thinking, responding to change in their social lives, to this invasion by the British South African company. And she was able to say, this is not correct, this is not right. We have the right to rule ourselves. We have the right to protect our way of life. And obviously she's a medium, so she's speaking the voice of the ancestors. But she was arrested and sentenced to death by hanging. And then her body disappeared, or at least her remains disappeared. Strangely enough, this past week, the British agreed to return some human remains to Zimbabwe. But apparently her remains have not been identified and found. So this work is a celebration of her life, her courage, and also an insistence on our part as the great children of these people to return the bones.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, okay, let's get a look then at your interpretation of that incredible story.
Yeah.
This is Nehanda, Manifesting Thinking.
We are not African.
Tasmania.
We are not so African.
Cannot kill the spirit, which can manage the body. Cannot kill the spirit. The spirit lives.
So she was an organiser, a revolutionary, but of course, as is so often the case in history, a woman whose name is perhaps not as well known as it should be outside of
Certainly not as well known as Cecil John Rhodes.
Absolutely not. There's always this narrative of men being involved in wars, uprising, but she didn't let her gender hold her back. How do you personally, in the 21st century, relate to that story?
No excuses. There should be no excuses. We have an intelligence. As a human animal, we have an intelligence that we should exploit frequently, often, on a daily, to address issues that are sometimes under-addressed. The question of gender should not be the reason why you fail to do something. The colonial history remains a huge subject that the United Nations or all these entities that were put into place to address man's inhumanity to men remains with us and needs to be addressed.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that, in fact, because your protagonist rises up against the then monarch, Queen Victoria, and the recent death of her great-great-granddaughter, Queen Elizabeth II, raised the question briefly in the United Kingdom of the royal family, and despite some Republican sentiment, there's still a strong attachment to it, despite all the violence and exploitation that it has stood for in the past.
Yes.
Why do you think people need these figures, these symbols?
I absolutely need Charwe Nyakasikana to remind me that I have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That those rights are not only for the Northern Hemisphere or for people who are white-skinned. We have the right to pursue our dreams. We should not be limited by our race, and definitely not by our gender.
Indeed. Now, your work features here in Paris as part of the Autumn Festival. Another artist showing work as part of that programme is Portuguese director Tiago Rodrigues. He's presented theatrical pieces that explore issues like fascism and the work of NGOs in war-torn areas, drama that seems to come straight from newspaper headlines. We asked him about the politically engaged nature of his work. Here's more from him.
I believe that provoking is not only a right, but also still a duty of artists in a society where the simplification of the speech leads to dangerous manipulations by populism and extremisms. I'm very passionate as a spectator, not that I'm working on it now, but very interested in the way, for instance, that refugees, non-European refugees, look at their hosting countries and at the idea of Europe. How can we enrich the idea of Europe with the eyes of those who are not European but are now European?
Nora, Tiago speaks there about political issues related to Europe with a Europe-centric view. But for you, from Zimbabwe, which was still known as Rhodesia when you were born, it declared independence that year, but it wasn't recognised until a lot longer. In 1980, that marked the beginning of the Mugabe years, who stayed in power for almost 4 decades before his death in 2019. He does cast a long shadow. How would you describe the effects of his rule on the country today?
My goodness, very complicated, very complicated. He was a revolutionary hero. I think the first 2 decades were celebrated and need to be celebrated by the entire Africa and the rest of the world. And the last 2 decades, not so glorious. It's unfortunate that most of what we think of the African independence is not complete independence, that we end up with exhausted economies. We end up with exhausted systems, education, health-wise, and lead to our leaders becoming radically dictatorial as a way to somehow salvage a system that they inherited. We should have had the stamina to completely erase these systems based on extractive economies and gone our own way. And perhaps history would be kinder to Robert Mugabe, but obviously it didn't go that way.
Now, that social and political commentary has always been in your work, and I wanted to look at a previous piece of yours, a portrait of myself as my father. It's been described as a visceral exploration of African masculinity. Let's take a look.
Good people, the question is, now that I have your attention, how put your hands up. Do you become? Put your hands up. Man. Black. Put your hands up. Well, it is time.
So in those movements, we can see something of a fight or combat. What sort of struggle are you alluding to there?
Like Robert Mugabe, who you just conjured up, my father was not capable. He was not able. The family was not a functioning family. He was a generation that had to deal with the first impact of what it meant to be colonized. And for him, alcohol was the answer. And all the kind of abuses that come with or support alcoholism. Brutality towards his children and my mother. So I wanted to highlight the stresses that men like my father or my brothers have to deal with in also a fastly shifting social situation. So I really wanted to put myself in the shoes of my father and develop a sympathy towards the African man, a way to endure with the African men, because as long as the African men is disempowered, so is the African woman's development.
We see the personal shockwaves there of political events. Now, finally, we asked you for a cultural tip, something you've particularly enjoyed recently. You pointed us in the direction of a young musician, dancer, rapper from London, Tyrone Isaac Stewart. What was it about his work that grabbed you?
I met this young man at a dance event, and his intelligence just stood out immediately. The complexity of his talents, that he could play the saxophone as well as dance and sing, and also some work with cameras. And I was just like, wow, a person after my own heart, because I think creativity should not be pigeonholed. It should not be boxed into, oh, you're a musician or you're a dancer. You are a human who thinks, who creates. And I've been devoted to his productivity, to his creativity, to the way he thinks, and continues to allow himself to be available to new things. So the next generation of jazz musicians, he is it. The next generation of amazing choreographer thinkers, he is it. Really celebrate him.
Another multidisciplinary artist,
Yes.
just like yourself. Nora, thank you so much for being with us today. Now, we'll leave you with a taste of Tyrone's style. This is Ni, and a reminder that you can get more arts and culture on our website and our social media feeds. There's more news coming up on France 24 just after this.
Sold together from seeds, songs for a medley. Underneath these stitches, the walking is arguably deadly. Might kill off your career, Deer in a headlight, gaslighted, walking in fear, red card. Get off the pitch, head down France from a crowd, slow walk to a bottomless pit. Surrendering knees to a habit of softness. The walk had a bop that casually talked to the ground.
Between 1970 and 1980, a number of Japanese citizens mysteriously disappeared. A mystery that was in fact a kidnapping program orchestrated by North Korea.
なもんですから日本海というのはやはり冷戦の海、拉致されたくるりくるりと回って。
In 2002, Kim Jong-il acknowledged 13 kidnappings. But how many people were really abducted? And in how many countries? While the United States supports the victims, North Korea has broken off talks. Many grey areas remain in this international story of espionage. Watch Niigata Revisited on France 24 and France24.com.